everyone, my name is Magz. I'm a software engineer at Cisco, and today I'm going to be giving you an introduction on NGRX Component Store, and I'll be walking through some updates that I'll be making to a demo application. So let's first start off by talking about what Component Store is. So Component Store is a state management library, and it is based on the Redux pattern. So why would you need Component Store? Well, I guess you would need Component Store if you wanted to add a reactive container of state to either your application or to your components. And today I'm going to show you just how easy it is. But first, we'll go over a sample app that we'll be updating. And this is a grocery list application that is composed of 3 tabs. The middle tab is your main grocery list, where you can add and remove items. Then you've got your shopping list tab for items that you're currently shopping for, and then you've got your favorites list. And both of those lists are subsets of your main grocery list. And to just further talk about the component hierarchy that we're dealing with is that the parent component in this case is our tabs component. And then we've got the 3 child tab components here. And today we'll be focusing on adding state to the tabs component and the grocery list component. So before we go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and install Component Store. And thankfully, it's pretty straightforward. You can just use your favorite package manager to install it, and you don't have to make any modifications to your app module file. So now that we've installed it, let's go ahead and create our first service. So we'll be creating a state container for our groceries, and we're going to call this a grocery store. And this grocery store is going to contain all of the items that are available to the user. And this is going to be the only place in the app that will be responsible for these items. So what we'll first do is create a service that extends Component Store. And you'll notice the generic T here currently. So what we'll do next is we'll create a state interface which describes the shape of our state. So in this case, we've got an array of grocery items, and then we've got another array of shopping list IDs. And we'll go ahead and update that generic with our grocery store state. And then you'll notice that our services constructor also needs to make a call to the base class constructor. And so we'll create an initial state object and call the super with that. And so we'll have some mock data here and then an empty list of shopping list IDs. And lastly, I wanted to mention that the injectable decorator up here is empty, because we're indicating that we are not going to be providing this service to the app root, that it won't be a singleton for the app. So now that we've created our service, we need to connect it to our component. And so we'll go to our tabs parent component, and all we need to do here is update our providers array and pass it the grocery service that we've just created. And I just wanted to reiterate that the Descendants, the child components, will be able to inject this newly created grocery store service. And we'll be taking advantage of that later on. So now that we've got some data initialized with our component store service, we want to display this data. So we'll go ahead and display it with selectors. But first, what is a selector? Well, a selector is a pure function that allows you to fetch a slice of your state. And that pure function takes a projector function, and that projector function describes how we're going to fetch that slice of state. And so in this case, we're just going to be fetching the items property off of our grocery store state. And a selector will return an observable, which we'll then be able to subscribe to later on. So let's go ahead and create our items selector in our grocery store service. And all that's going to do is just return our items array. And just another note is that this property will be accessible to our child components. So now that we've updated the grocery store service, let's go ahead and update the child component. And so what we need to do here is just inject the grocery store service into our component. And we can also create a reference to the new item selector that we created previously. So those are the only 2 updates we need to do in the class. The next update is in the template of our component. And so we'll be using Angular's async pipe to subscribe to our items observable. And then we'll be able to use the last emitted value throughout the rest of our template. And so in this case, we're just displaying the length of our array and here we're just iterating over the items. And so this will result in us having an empty grocery list at first, but after we incorporate the selector into our template, we'll be able to display our initial data. So now that we've displayed some data, what do we want to do if we want to update our state? So ComponentStore gives us three methods: patchState, setState, and updaters. And for the sake of this demo, we'll be focusing on using updaters. So what is an updater? Well, an updater accepts a pure function with two parameters, and that is your current state and an argument. And that argument is usually the value that you want to update your state with. And this pure function will also return a new instance of your state. So you'll see that the object returned here is of type grocery store state. So here's a second example where I'm assigning the updater to a variable called myUpdater. And this will allow us to call the updater with a single parameter, which is the string ID. And then we'll be able to make the updates that way. So we'll go ahead and create an updater for our grocery store. And all this updater will do is just add an item to our shopping list array. So this is kind of a verbose example, but all we're doing here is just making a copy of our existing array and adding the new ID here. And we're just returning our new state with our newly updated array. And so this will result in, so the next thing we have to do is update our component to use this updater. So let's say we have a click handler in our component. We can just make the call to the updater here so that whenever we click on an item, for example, it'll call the updater and then update our state. So that will result in us being able to click on an item in our main grocery list, and then we can see the updated item in our shopping list, for example. So the final feature that ComponentStore offers are effects. So what is an effect? So an effect is a function that also takes a callback function, and this callback function will return an observable. But whenever we call our effect, we'll be able to perform some tasks on each value that gets passed into it. And you can use RxJS operators in this case here. So I'll just show you another example here as well. But also, why would you want to use an effect? Well, you can use an effect if you want to handle race conditions, if you want to fetch data from an API, or if you wanted to perform synchronous or asynchronous tasks. So here I've got another dummy effect, but I'm just showing this example where if we were to call this effect multiple times, we have the switch map operator here, which would kind of help us with handling the race conditions. And so our effect that we'll create for the app is just a view details effect, which will just navigate us to another page. So this is the effect right here, where every time I call it with a string ID, I'll be able to just do some naive error checking just to make sure that the ID is valid. And if it's valid, then let's just use the router navigate and navigate you to the next page. So let's go ahead and update the component now. And let's say we have another click handler for a view details button. So if we click on that view details button, we'll just be able to call the effect directly, and that should navigate us to the next page. And so here it would be updated. So the user slides button, clicks the view details or the item details button, and they get navigated to the next page. So in summary, we went over